Dukkha, the diagnosis. The Buddha said dukkha has 3 layers. The first one you already know. The second one you've felt but never named. The third one, the one almost no one talks about, is the one that explains why even a good life can feel like something is slightly, persistently, almost imperceptibly off. Most people hear Buddhism teaches that life is suffering and stop right there. They file it under pessimism. They move on. And in doing so, they miss what may be the most precise diagnosis ever made about the human condition, and the fact that it comes with a cure. Today we're going to look at all 3 layers, not the cartoon version, the real thing. And by the end, you may find that the teaching you thought was the darkest in Buddhism is actually the most hopeful. But before we get to what the Buddha taught, let's start with what you already know. You've had moments when everything was going well. By any reasonable measure, fine. The relationship, the health, the work, the finances, everything more or less in order. And somewhere underneath the fineness, not loudly, not dramatically, a quiet sense that something wasn't quite settled. Not ingratitude, not depression, not anything you could point to and say that's the problem. Something quieter. A quality of things not quite resting that was almost imperceptible until you looked directly at it. Maybe it showed up as a restlessness you couldn't explain. Maybe as a faint dissatisfaction that had no object. Nothing specific was wrong, and yet something wasn't quite right. Maybe it surfaced in those moments just after you got what you wanted. The promotion, the house, the relationship. And the satisfaction lasted days, maybe weeks, and then faded. Not into misery, into something more like a return to baseline. As though the needle always drifts back to the same position, no matter where you push it. That was not your imagination. That was not a symptom of something wrong with you. The Buddha had a name for it. He said it was the most important thing to understand about human experience. And understanding it, really understanding it, is not the beginning of pessimism. It is the beginning of freedom. The word is dukkha, and the first thing to know is that suffering is a bad translation. Not wrong, exactly, just too narrow. Suffering captures the obvious layer, the pain, the grief, the loss. But dukkha runs deeper than that, and if you translate it as suffering, you've already closed the door on the 2 subtler layers that make the teaching extraordinary. The traditional etymology traces it to 2 Pali roots, du, meaning bad or difficult, and ka, the axle hole of a wheel. A wheel with a bad axle hole. It catches. It doesn't roll freely. There's friction where there should be smoothness. Not a catastrophic failure, but a persistent, low-grade, not quite rightness built into the mechanism itself. Modern Sanskrit scholars think the actual origin is probably different. Dustha, meaning standing badly, unstable, ill-positioned. The kind of stance where you're upright but never quite balanced, always making micro-adjustments just to stay in place. Either way, the image holds. Whether it's a wheel that doesn't roll true, or a person who can't quite stand straight, the quality being pointed to is the same. Something that doesn't settle. Something that requires constant maintenance just to keep going. Not a disaster. A structural condition. The monk and scholar Thanissaro Bhikkhu, whose translations we'll be drawing from throughout this video, translates dukkha not as suffering, but as stress. And his reasons are worth hearing. First, stress is hard to romanticize. You can romanticize your sufferings, turn them into narrative, into identity, into art. But stress is just stress. It resists the story we want to tell about it. Second, everyone recognizes it. A journalist once asked him, "Why do Buddhists talk about suffering all the time? I don't have any suffering." He asked back, "Do you have any stress?" "Oh yeah, lots." That's what we're talking about. And third, and this is the one that matters most for what we're about to explore, there are subtle levels of dukkha. Even in deep concentration, where there is genuine pleasure, even equanimity, and no blatant suffering at all, there is still stress. By translating dukkha as a range from suffering down through stress, you realize it covers not just the obvious pain, but more refined levels that most people never examine. So when you hear dukkha in what follows, hear stress, with the understanding that it stretches all the way from the sharp end of agony to the almost invisible hum of things not quite at rest. When the Buddha first awakened, he almost didn't teach. This is recorded in the Arya-Pariyasana Sutta, MN 26. After his awakening at the foot of the Bodhi tree, the Buddha looked at what he had understood and thought, "This is too deep, too hard to see, too counterintuitive." The world is built on the assumption that the right conditions, the right relationship, the right achievement, the right experience will finally satisfy. He had seen that this assumption has a structural flaw built into it. Not because conditions are evil, not because pleasure is an illusion, but because satisfaction sought through conditions cannot hold. And the reason it cannot hold goes deeper than most people are willing to look. He hesitated. Then, the texts say, Brahma Sahampati appeared and said, "There are beings with little dust in their eyes who are falling away because they do not hear the Dhamma. There will be those who will understand." The Buddha surveyed the world. He saw beings like lotuses in a pond, some submerged in mud, some at the surface, some rising above the water. And he consented to teach. The texts record his words. "Open are the doors to the deathless." He began with dukkha, not because it was the easiest teaching, because it was the most necessary. In the Dukkata Sutta, SN 45-165, the Buddha names three kinds of dukkha directly: dukkha-dukkha, the stressfulness of pain; vipariṇāma-dukkha, the stressfulness of change; saṅkhāra-dukkha, the stressfulness of fabrication. And then, immediately, in the same breath, he says, "The Noble Eightfold Path is to be developed for direct knowledge of these three kinds of stress, for the full understanding of them, for their utter destruction, for their abandoning." He never names the disease without naming the treatment. That matters. Hold it. Now, a note of intellectual honesty. The three names are the Buddha's. They appear in the Sutta Pitaka, in his own words. But the detailed definitions, the precise way each layer is explained, the examples, the distinctions, those were elaborated 5 centuries later by the commentator Buddhaghosa in the Visuddhimagga. The names are canonical. The framework we use to understand them draws on both the suttas and the commentary tradition. Where the line falls, I'll tell you. The commentary also reversed the order of the last two, placing the stressfulness of change before the stressfulness of fabrication, ascending from obvious to subtle. That's the order we'll follow. It makes pedagogical sense. Start with what you recognize. Move toward what you felt but never named. Arrive at what almost no one talks about. 3 layers, 1 teaching. And by the time we reach the 3rd, you'll understand why the Buddha almost didn't speak, and why it matters that he did. Layer 1. Dukkha-dukkha, the stressfulness of pain. The first layer is the one you already know. The Buddha called it dukkha-dukkha, the stressfulness of pain itself. Stress in its most undeniable form, the kind that needs no philosophy to recognize. In his very first teaching, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, SN 5611, delivered to 5 monks in the deer park at Isipatana, the Buddha laid it out as a list. And there is something remarkable about this list. It is not abstract. It is not metaphysical. It reads like an inventory of what every human being in every century already knows to be true. Birth is stressful. Aging is stressful. Death is stressful. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair are stressful. Association with the unbeloved is stressful. Separation from the loved is stressful. Not getting what is wanted is stressful. That's it. No theory, no elaborate cosmology, just a clear-eyed naming of conditions that every person listening, whether in a deer park 25 centuries ago or on a sofa tonight, has encountered firsthand. Birth, not the celebration, but the entry into a body that will age, sicken, and die. Aging, not a concept, but the slow dismantling you watch in the mirror, in your joints, in the faces of people you love. Death, not a philosophical abstraction, but the thing you will do, the thing everyone you know will do. And no amount of planning can make it optional. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, despair, the emotional weather of a life lived among things that break, people who leave, and bodies that fail. And then the two that cut closest, being stuck with what you don't want, being separated from what you do. These are not exotic Buddhist observations. These are Tuesday. These are the structure of an ordinary afternoon. The colleague you can't avoid, the person you miss, the gap between how things are and how you need them to be. This is the layer that gives Buddhism its reputation for pessimism. And it's easy to see why. If this is all you hear, life is suffering, life is suffering, life is suffering, you'd be right to walk away. Who wants to sit with that for 45 minutes? But here is where almost everyone stops. And here is where the teaching actually begins. Because the Buddha didn't end his sentence with that list. He ended it with 9 words that change everything. In short, the 5 clinging aggregates are stressful. In Pali, Panchupadana-khandha-dukkha. This is the pivot. This is where the first noble truth goes from a list of painful experiences to a structural insight about how experience itself works. And most presentations of Buddhism skip right over it. What are the 5 aggregates? They are the Buddha's map of everything you call experience, form, the body, the physical, feeling, not emotion, but the bare quality of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral that accompanies every moment of contact. Perception, the recognition, the labeling, that's a tree, that's a threat, that's my mother. Fabrications, the mental formations, the intentions, the impulses, the shaping activity of the mind. And consciousness, awareness itself, arising at each sense door. That's it. According to the Buddha, everything you have ever experienced, every sensation, every thought, every memory, every moment of your life is some combination of these 5. There is no 6th. There is no hidden self sitting behind them pulling strings. These 5, arising and passing in various configurations, are the whole show. But notice, the Buddha did not say the 5 aggregates are stressful. He said the 5 clinging aggregates are stressful. And this distinction, the difference between khandha and upadana khandha, is the difference between experience and imprisonment. The Upadana Sutta, SN 2248, makes this explicit. The 5 aggregates are any form, feeling, perception, fabrication, or consciousness whatsoever, the raw material of experience. The 5 clinging aggregates are the same range, but accompanied by clinging, when attention fixes on their attractive features, when passion arises, when the mind begins fabricating mine and me and what I am around them. The body is not dukkha, clinging to the body as what must not age, must not sicken, must not die. That clinging is dukkha. A feeling of pleasure is not dukkha. Grasping at that pleasure, needing it to stay, building your sense of self around it, that is dukkha. The aggregates, experienced without clinging, still involve some stress. We'll get to that in the 3rd layer. But without clinging, that stress does not weigh down the mind. This is not a small distinction. This is the entire architecture of the teaching. The problem is not that you have a body. The problem is not that you feel things. The problem is not that you are conscious. The problem is what you do with these, the clinging, the claiming, the insistence that what is impermanent must be permanent, that what is not self must be self, that what is stressful must somehow be made into lasting satisfaction. And there is one more thing in the first noble truth that most people miss, a word that changes the entire posture of the practitioner toward dukkha. The word is pariṇā. In the same sutta, SN 5611, the Buddha describes 3 rounds of knowledge for each of the 4 noble truths. For the first truth, dukkha, the 3 rounds are: this is the noble truth of stress. That's identification, seeing it clearly, naming it. This noble truth of stress is to be comprehended. That's the task. The duty assigned to the first truth is not to eliminate dukkha. That's the task of the 3rd truth. The duty here is pariṇā, full comprehension. To understand dukkha so thoroughly, so precisely, so completely that you see exactly how it works. And in seeing how it works, you loosen its grip. This noble truth of stress has been comprehended. That's completion. The work is done. This matters because it sets the tone for everything that follows. The Buddha's instruction regarding dukkha is not wallow in it, not accept it passively, not romanticize it into a spiritual identity. The instruction is understand it, comprehend it the way a doctor comprehends a disease, not by suffering from it, but by knowing its mechanism so precisely that you can address it. Pariṇā is active. Pariṇā is skilled. Pariṇā is the difference between a patient who says, "I'm sick," and collapses, and a patient who says, "I'm sick. Now tell me exactly what's wrong, because I intend to get better." So, the first layer, dukkha-dukkha, the stressfulness of pain, birth, aging, death, sorrow, separation, not getting what you want. This is the layer that everyone uses to characterize Buddhism. This is the layer that earns the label pessimistic. This is the layer where most people stop. But the Buddha didn't stop here. He pointed past the list to something deeper, the 5 clinging aggregates, and he assigned a task, not passive suffering, but full comprehension. Understand this, really understand this, and you've taken the first step on a path that has an end. Because there is a second kind of dukkha, and it doesn't live in the painful experiences. It lives inside the pleasant ones. Layer 2, vipariṇāma-dukkha, the stressfulness of change. You know what it feels like to lose something painful? A bad job ends. A toxic relationship finally breaks. An illness passes. There is relief, and relief makes sense. The stress was in the thing, and the thing is gone, and now the stress is gone too. But you also know what it feels like to get something wonderful and watch it not hold. The vacation that was perfect for 3 days and then, somewhere around day 4, started feeling ordinary. The new house that thrilled you for a month and then became just the place where you live. The achievement you worked toward for years, and the morning after, waking up and thinking, now what? This is not ingratitude. This is not a character flaw. This is the second layer of dukkha, and the Buddha said it lives not after pleasant experience ends, but inside pleasant experience, while it's still happening. He called it vipariṇāma-dukkha, the stressfulness of change, and it is the shadow that anicca, impermanence, casts over everything we love. In the Rahogata Sutta, SN 3611, a monk comes to the Buddha with a direct question. The Buddha has said that whatever is felt comes under stress. The monk wants to know, in what connection did you say this? The Buddha's answer is startlingly concise. That I have stated simply in connection with the inconstancy of fabrications. That I have stated simply in connection with the nature of fabrications to end, to fall away, to fade away, to cease, to change. That's it. No elaborate argument, just a pointing. The reason pleasant feeling is stressful is because it arises within conditions that are inconstant. The pleasure is real. The instability of the conditions producing it is also real. And the second fact doesn't cancel the first. It inhabits it. They coexist in the same moment. This is vipariṇāma-dukkha, stated directly and canonically. Not, pleasure is bad. Not, you shouldn't enjoy things. But, whatever is pleasant arises dependent on conditions, and conditions change. The change is not a future event that might or might not happen. The change is a present characteristic of the experience right now. The pleasure is already impermanent while you're feeling it. And somewhere in you, below the enjoyment, below the gratitude, something knows this. The Mahadukkhakanda Sutta, MN 13, takes this further. It introduces a framework the Buddha used again and again. Asada, adnava, nisarana, allure, drawback, escape. Everything that attracts us has an allure. The Buddha never denied this. He never said pleasure is an illusion or that beauty is a trick. The allure is real. It's the reason you reach for it. And he said, if there were no allure in these things, beings would not become infatuated with them. The allure is genuine. But every allure has a drawback. And for feelings, for the pleasant experiences we build our lives around, the drawback is stated in one sentence. The fact that feeling is inconstant, stressful, subject to change. This is the drawback of feelings. Even jhanic bliss, the deep pleasure of meditative concentration, the most refined, pleasant feeling available to a human mind, falls under this. Not because the bliss is fake, because the bliss is conditioned. And what is conditioned is inconstant. And what is inconstant carries, even in its pleasantness, the stress of its own instability. Then the Buddha does something that only he would do. He makes the abstraction visceral. In the same sutta, MN 13, he asks his monks to consider a young woman, 15 or 16 years old, at the height of her beauty. He acknowledges the allure directly. This is attractive. This is what draws the eye, what stirs desire, what the world calls beautiful. Then he asks, what happens to that same body? Not a different body, the same one, at 80, at 90, at 100, bent over, leaning on a cane, gray-haired, wrinkled, broken-toothed, then sick, then dead, then, and this is where the Buddha pushes past where most teachers would stop, the stages of decay, the body bloated, discolored, gnawed by animals, scattered bones bleached white by sun and rain. He is not being morbid. he is being precise. The allure was real, and this is also real. They are not two different stories. They are one story seen from beginning to end. The drawback doesn't replace the allure. The drawback is where the allure goes. It was always going there. The only question is whether you see it while the allure is still in front of you, or only after. This is vipariṇāma-dukkha, not the suffering that comes when pleasure ends, the stress that is present in pleasure. Because pleasure is woven from threads that are already unraveling. There is a verse in the Itivutaka, Iti 53, that compresses this into 3 lines. A feeling of pleasure should be seen as stressful. A feeling of pain should be seen as an arrow. A feeling of neither pleasure nor pain should be seen as inconstant. 3 kinds of feeling, 3 instructions. And notice, the instruction for pleasure is not see it as evil or see it as forbidden. The instruction is see it as stressful. See the stress in it, not instead of the pleasure, alongside it. See both at once. That is the skill. If the first layer of dukkha is about what goes wrong in life, the second layer is about what goes right, and why even that doesn't settle. This is anicca's shadow. Because things are impermanent, even pleasure carries dukkha within it, not after it ends, but while it's here. The sunset is beautiful and it's fading. The child is laughing and growing older with every breath. The moment is perfect and it's already gone. Most people feel this and call it nostalgia, or melancholy, or bittersweet. The Buddha called it the second kind of stress, and he said, don't romanticize it. Don't turn it into poetry and stop there. Understand it. Because understanding it is not the end of enjoyment. It's the beginning of a different relationship with enjoyment. One that doesn't need the sunset to freeze in place. One that doesn't need the child to stop growing. One that can hold pleasure and impermanence in the same hand without clenching. But there is a third kind, and this one goes deeper than either of the first 2. The first lives in painful experience. The second lives inside pleasant experience. The third, the one from the hook, the one almost no one talks about, lives inside all experience. It is the background hum of conditioned existence itself. And understanding it is what separates someone who has heard about Buddhism from someone who has understood what the Buddha actually saw. Layer 3, saṅkhāra-dukkha, the stressfulness of fabrication. Imagine you are gazing at a flower, not thinking about it, not analyzing it, just looking. The light is right, the color is vivid. There is genuine pleasure in the looking, not dramatic, not ecstatic, just a quiet, clean enjoyment of something beautiful. Now, the first layer of dukkha is not here. Nothing is going wrong. There is no pain, no loss, no sorrow. The second layer, you could find it if you looked. The flower will wilt. The light will change. This moment will pass. But right now, in this moment, you're not thinking about that. You're just looking. And yet, there is a stress here that has nothing to do with the flower wilting and nothing to do with anything going wrong. It is the stress of the experience being maintained. The eyes have to stay focused. The attention has to hold. The body has to be positioned. The mind has to keep selecting this color, this light, this angle from the infinite field of possible experience, moment after moment after moment. There is an effort in the gazing that is so familiar, so constant, so woven into the fabric of every waking second that you have never once noticed it. The monk and scholar Thanissaro Bhikkhu puts it this way: Even flower gazing is stressful, despite the obvious pleasure it provides, for it relies on a fragile tension among the combined factors making up the experience. A fragile tension among the combined factors. This is saṅkhāra-dukkha, the stressfulness of fabrication, the third layer, and it is the one that changes everything. To understand it, you need to understand what saṅkhāra means. And this is one of the most important words in the entire Pali Canon, a word that does enormous work across multiple contexts. At its most basic, saṅkhāra means putting together, fabrication, the intentional activity of the mind through which it shapes, constructs, and maintains experience. Every moment of consciousness is not a passive reception of what's out there. It is an active fabrication, the mind selecting, organizing, building, holding patterns together so that something coherent emerges. The Kulavedalla Sutta, MN 44, identifies three types: bodily fabrication, the in and out breathing that keeps the body going; verbal fabrication, directed thought and evaluation, the inner commentary; and mental fabrication, perceptions and feelings, the labeling and the hedonic tone that color every moment. You are fabricating right now, listening to this voice, making sense of these words, holding the thread of the argument, feeling interest or boredom or curiosity. All of it is fabrication. You cannot stop fabricating and still be conscious. Fabrication is not something the mind does sometimes. It is what the mind is doing, always, in every moment of experience, without exception. And here is the third layer of dukkha, the fabrication itself, the putting together, the maintaining, the holding in place, is inherently stressful. Not because something has gone wrong, not because the content is unpleasant, but because maintaining any constructed experience requires continuous effort, continuous conditions, continuous fragility. Thanissaro offers a metaphor that makes this concrete. Imagine, he says, trying to build your house on a sandy plot where the ocean is coming in and there are earthquakes. You can build. You can even build something beautiful. But the ground itself, the conditions on which you're building, are unstable. The instability doesn't wait for the house to fall down. It is present in every moment the house stands. Every moment of standing is also a moment of being held up against what would bring it down. That effort of holding up, that constant, invisible background maintenance, that is saṅkhāra-dukkha. And it doesn't only apply to unpleasant experience. It doesn't only apply to pleasant experience that will change. It applies to all conditioned experience, including equanimity, including deep meditation, including the most refined states of mind a human being can achieve. Wherever there is fabrication, there is this layer of stress, because fabrication, by its nature, requires assembly. And what requires assembly is fragile. And what is fragile carries the stress of its own fragility, whether or not anything has yet broken. There is another metaphor, this one from Ajahn Suwat, Thanissaro's teacher, that draws an important line. Imagine a mountain. A mountain is heavy. That heaviness is simply what it is, a characteristic, a property. It's heavy whether anyone touches it or not. That's dukkha as a characteristic of all conditioned things, the inherent stress, the saṅkhāra-dukkha, present in every fabricated experience simply because it is fabricated. But the heaviness of the mountain only becomes a burden for the person who tries to lift it. That's dukkha as a noble truth, the stress that comes specifically with clinging. The mountain hasn't changed. What changed is someone's relationship to it. Someone decided this mountain is mine. Someone decided it must be moved, must be held, must be kept. And now the heaviness that was simply a characteristic has become suffering. This distinction is critical, and it leads to one of the most misunderstood points in the entire teaching. Arahants, those who have completed the path, who have fully relinquished clinging, still live in the same world you do. Their experience of the six senses is fabricated. Their eyes see, their ears hear, their bodies feel pleasure and pain. There is still saṅkhāra-dukkha in their experience. The inherent stress of conditioned existence doesn't vanish because you've awakened. The mountain is still heavy, but their minds don't suffer from it because they don't try to lift it. No craving, no clinging, no insistence that what is fabricated must be permanent, must be self, must be satisfactory. The background hum of fabrication is still there. It simply no longer weighs anything down. Now, if all of this sounds abstract, the Buddha had a way of making it visceral. And this may be the most striking analogy in the entire canon. In the Magandiya Sutta, MN 75, the Buddha describes a leper, a man covered with sores, skin broken open, picking at his own scabs. To ease the itching and the pain, he crouches over a pit of glowing embers and cauterizes his wounds with the heat. And, this is the part that matters, he feels a kind of relief. A modicum of enjoyment, the Sutta says. The burning brings a moment of ease. The scratching brings a moment of satisfaction. Not because the fire is good for him, because the disease has distorted what good feels like. Then a doctor cures him, fully. The sores heal, the itching stops, the skin closes, and the cured man walks past another leper crouching over the same pit of embers, and feels no envy, none. If two strong men grabbed him and dragged him back toward the fire, he would twist his body away with everything he had. The fire that once felt like relief now feels like exactly what it is, burning. The Buddha's application. Sensualities are actually painful to the touch, very hot and scorching. But when beings are not free from passion, chewed up by sensual craving, burning with sensual fever, their faculties are impaired, which is why they have the skewed perception of pleasant. Vipariṇāma-dukkha, skewed perception, distorted perception. The disease doesn't just cause suffering, it distorts what suffering looks like. The person in the grip of craving genuinely perceives the fire as warmth. And the more they partake, this is the devastating part. The more their sensual craving increases, and the more they burn with sensual fever, and yet they feel a modicum of enjoyment. The escalation is structural. More feeding doesn't reduce the hunger. More feeding increases the hunger. The itch gets worse with every scratch. Not because you scratched wrong, because scratching is what the itch wants you to do, and the itch is the disease. The Raja Sutta, SN 420, puts it in terms of gold. Mara, the tempter, comes to the Buddha and offers him righteous kingship over the entire world. The Buddha responds with a verse. The entirety of a mountain of gold, of solid bullion, even twice that wouldn't suffice for one person. Not, wouldn't be enough for a greedy person. For one person, any person. The insufficiency is not in the supply. The insufficiency is in the mechanism. Craving is not a problem of too little. It is a problem of structure. You cannot fill a container that has no bottom, and craving, tanha, is a container with no bottom. No amount poured in will ever reach the top. The mountain of gold doesn't fail because it's too small. It fails because wanting doesn't work that way. The Adittapariyaya Sutta, SN 3528, the fire sermon, extends this to the level of sense contact itself. The eye is burning, forms are burning, eye consciousness is burning, eye contact is burning, burning with the fire of passion, aversion, and delusion. And so for the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind, all 6 sense bases, not on fire metaphorically. On fire in the sense that every moment of unawakened sense contact is conditioned by passion, conditioned by aversion, conditioned by delusion. And this conditioning is not an occasional lapse. It is the default state. The burning is not something that happens to you when things go wrong. The burning is what is happening right now, in ordinary experience, in the way the mind meets the world at every sense door. This is saṅkhāra-dukkha at the most fundamental level, not the suffering of things falling apart, not the stress of pleasant things changing, the stress built into the contact itself, into the fabrication of experience, moment by moment, in a mind that has not yet seen through its own construction. The Dhammapada, DHP 278, compresses the entire teaching into 2 lines. All fabrications are stressful. When you see this with discernment, you grow disenchanted with stress. This is the path to purity. Disenchantment, not despair, not rejection. Nibbida, the falling away of the spell. The moment when the leper, now cured, looks at the fire and sees fire. Not warmth, not relief, just fire. And that disenchantment, that clear seeing, is not the end of experience. It is the beginning of freedom within experience. So let's be precise about what the 3rd layer is and what it is not. It is not pessimism. It is not the claim that life is terrible. It is not a demand that you stop enjoying flowers or sunsets or the people you love. It is a diagnosis. A diagnosis this exact is not dark. It is hopeful. Because if you can name exactly what is wrong, not vaguely, not approximately, but with the precision of a surgeon marking the incision line, then you can address exactly what is wrong. The 1st layer says, there is obvious pain. Yes, you knew that. The 2nd layer says, even pleasure carries stress because it's impermanent. You felt that. Now you have the name. The 3rd layer says, the fabrication of experience itself, the putting together, the maintaining, the holding in place, carries an inherent stress that is present in every moment of conditioned existence. And you have been living inside this stress your entire life without once seeing it clearly. Not because you're blind, because the stress is so constant, so total, so much the water you swim in, that you never thought to ask, is this water? The Buddha saw the water, and he said, there is dry land. The diagnosis, 4 noble truths. Now you've seen all 3 layers, and now we can talk about what the Buddha was actually doing when he taught them. He was not making a philosophical statement about the nature of reality. He was not offering an opinion. He was making a diagnosis. The commentary tradition, Buddhaghosa, writing in the 5th century, made this comparison explicit. The 4 noble truths have the structure of a medical case. Disease, cause, prognosis, treatment, but the structure was always there in the suttas themselves. Buddhaghosa didn't invent it. He named what was already visible. Dukkha, the 1st noble truth, is the symptom, not a judgment, not a condemnation, a symptom. The doctor who says, you have a fever, is not being pessimistic. The doctor who says, you have a fever, is the only person in the room who can help you. 3 layers of symptom. The obvious pain, dukkha-dukkha. The stress hidden inside pleasure, vipariṇāma-dukkha. The background hum of fabrication itself, saṅkhāra-dukkha. The Buddha identified all three with a precision that 25 centuries later has not been improved upon. Samudaya, the second noble truth, is the cause. And the cause is not existence. The cause is not the body, not the world, not the fact that you were born. The cause is tanha, craving, the thirst that drives the leper back to the fire. The mechanism that ensures a mountain of gold is never enough. The reaching, the grasping, the insistence that what is fabricated must somehow be made to hold still. Three kinds of craving: craving for sensual pleasure, craving for becoming, craving for non-becoming, the desire to have, the desire to be, and the desire to not be. Between them, they cover every direction the mind can lean. The cause is specific. The cause is identifiable. The cause is not life. It is something the mind does. And what the mind does, the mind can learn to stop doing. And now, the truth that changes everything. The one that makes Buddhism not what most people think it is. Nirodha, the third noble truth, is the prognosis. And the prognosis is, this can be cured, not managed, not coped with, not reduced to a tolerable level, cured. The craving that generates dukkha can be relinquished, completely. The fire can go out, not by smothering it, but by removing the fuel. The Nibbana Sutta, UD 8.3, states it with a directness that leaves no room for metaphor. There is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated. If there were not that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, escape from the born, become, made, fabricated would not be discerned. But precisely because there is an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, escape from the born, become, made, fabricated is discerned. This is not poetry. This is a truth claim. There exists something that is not fabricated, not conditioned, not subject to arising and passing away. And because it exists, freedom is not a philosophical ideal. It is a real destination with a real path leading to it. Magga, the fourth noble truth, is the treatment, the noble eightfold path. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. 8 factors, practiced together, leading to the cessation of craving, the cessation of clinging, the cessation of dukkha. 4 truths: symptom, cause, prognosis, treatment. A complete medical case, stated in the first teaching the Buddha ever gave, and never retracted, never revised, never softened in the 45 years of teaching that followed. This is why the word diagnosis matters. A diagnosis is not a verdict. A diagnosis is the opposite of a verdict. A verdict says, this is how it is, and nothing can be done. A diagnosis says, this is how it is, and here is what we do about it. The first noble truth, heard alone, sounds like despair. Heard is part of 4. Heard is the first movement of a structure that includes cause, cure, and treatment. It sounds like what it is, the most precise, most honest, most ultimately hopeful assessment of the human condition ever articulated. The Buddha was not telling you that life is suffering. He was telling you that the suffering has a structure. The structure has a cause. The cause can be removed, and the removal is complete. Remember, he almost didn't teach. He saw how deep the diagnosis went and thought, who will understand this? Then Brahma said, there are beings with little dust in their eyes. And the Buddha opened the doors to the deathless. He opened them for the beings who could hear not just the first truth, which is the hardest, but the third, which is the most important to believe. RC completion. There is a sutta that ties everything together, not just this video, but the arc we've been building across 3 films. The Anaṭtalakkhana Sutta, SN 2259, the Buddha's second discourse, delivered days after his first, days after the teaching on dukkha, craving, cessation, and the path. The 5 monks who heard the first sermon were still with him. They had understood the diagnosis. Now he asked them to look deeper. He took each of the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, fabrications, consciousness, and he asked 3 questions. The same 3 questions applied to each one. Is form constant or inconstant? Inconstant, Lord. And is that which is inconstant easeful or stressful? Stressful, Lord. And is it fitting to regard what is inconstant, stressful, subject to change as, this is mine, this is myself, this is what I am? No, Lord. 3 questions. And in those 3 questions, 3 characteristics. Is it constant? No. Anicca. Is what is inconstant easeful or stressful? Stressful. Dukkha. Is what is stressful and changing fit to be called mine or myself? No. Anatta. Impermanence leads to stress. Stress leads to the realization this cannot be self. Not because self doesn't exist as a metaphysical fact, but because clinging to what is impermanent and stressful as me and mine is the engine that keeps the whole cycle turning. And then the text records what happened next. The monks, seeing this clearly, seeing impermanence, seeing stress, seeing not self, experienced nibbida, disenchantment. The spell broke. Through disenchantment came viraga, dispassion. Through dispassion came vimutti, release. Their minds, through lack of clinging, were freed. 3 questions, 1 cascading insight. 5 monks who walked into the deer park as seekers and walked out as arahants. We began this video with a quiet observation. You've had moments when everything was fine, and something underneath the fineness wasn't quite settled. Now you know what that is. Not a flaw in you, not a failure of gratitude, a structural characteristic of conditioned experience, the stress of fabrication, the 3rd layer that almost no one talks about. And now you know, the Buddha saw it too. He saw it with a clarity that made him hesitate to teach. He saw all 3 layers, the obvious pain, the stress inside pleasure, the background hum of fabrication, and he diagnosed them with the precision of a surgeon. And then he said, the disease has a cure. The craving can be relinquished. There's an unborn, an unfabricated, an end to this. This is not the teaching of a pessimist. This is the teaching of someone who understood the problem so completely that he could see all the way through to the other side. Impermanence, not self, stress. 3 angles on the same truth, and now you've seen all 3. The 3rd kind of dukkha, the one from the beginning, the one almost no one talks about. Now you know its name. Now you know what it is. And now you know it has an end.